Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome Darin Crosby to Procurement Heads Head-to-Head series. Darin is currently an executive interim and consultant at Oodle Finance, a market disrupting fintech in the automotive sector, currently in hypergrowth. Darin, welcome.
Thanks for having us, James. Cheers.
Absolute pleasure. So Darin, just to start off, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your procurement journey so far?
Sure, it's definitely been a journey. I started working, left school, worked in a jigsaw factory for 6 months, and then I became an engineer. So I did an engineering apprenticeship. So procurement was quite far from mine then. Worked as an apprentice up onto the management team for 10 years in an engineering business. And as I went through that, I had about 6 or 7 different roles, and all of them were supplier interfacing. So there was a lot of about 80% of our spend at the time was third-party spend, and for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I headed up supply chain. So as procurement, made that more strategic in nature, but also things like stores, supplier quality, the whole end-to-end supply chain for the business. Left there, did a gap year, and then went on to work for JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, and really got into Six Sigma value stream mapping. Really understood about cross-functional teamwork, and I was a cost engineer across the interior trim and restraints. So sitting between procurement and sitting between engineering, just understanding those constraints. But it was a really enjoyable time. Then got approached and spent 3 years at Nokia looking after sourcing for the Vertu division, which is luxury mobile phones. So I know buying things like liquid metal, sapphire, diamonds, some real. Did loads of travel to Asia, built a new supply base and expanded the team for that. Then took another year out because I hadn't done enough travel, so I did some more travel then. Came back, and then because up till then I'd done probably 80-90% of my time was in directs, and after buying things like I've just described, sapphire and stuff like that, there's not really another direct material job that was of interest. So went to Technicolor, looked after indirect. It was outsourced as well. So what I mean by outsourced, the procurement function, some of the procurement function was outsourced. So I managed that relationship with a third party as a BPO, and that had a international coverage. So a lot of technology, broadcast type equipment, all your general indirects that you'd see in any business. And then got approached by Auto Trader. Spent 4 years at Auto Trader, very enjoyable. It was pre-IPO, so the primary objective was set up a procurement function, but I also looked after legal, facilities, property as well at the same time, to build a team, put in that basic governance foundation, greenfield, etc., that people have talked about. And then also had a couple of other roles post that. One is looking after product and marketing for the leisure and commercial vehicles, transferring that digital business, print business over into the digital sphere, and also an ops role where really got to understand, who the customers of, what the customer journeys look like for both trade and consumer customers for Auto Trader, as well as a technology integration project. So a kind of a large, not a standard procurement technology, but a business-wide procurement business-wide technology infrastructure. And at that point, I'd done quite a long time, and 20 years there. And I decided, because a lot of my roles have been around transformation, I then decided to become a consultant and executive interim. Effectively, spent 5 years working in consultancies and 5 years working for myself. The 5 years in consultancies were 2, one large, one small consultancy. Worked across probably about 30 or 40 different businesses in that time. Many high growth, many private equity backed, focused on transformation change, a lot of target operating model work, a lot focused into source to pay and procurement, but also started to, because of my time primarily at Auto Trader, really understanding, consumers and marketing, etc., really started to work in that kind of what's the return on investment from, in the marketing, media, customer experience space, and that digital space, the digital customer experience, not digital procurement digital, but digital for how businesses, their e-commerce sites, etc. So that was kind of what led me to where I am now. So I've done that for about 10 years now, really enjoyed it. So a lot of autonomy and a choice.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. And just to set the scene for everybody watching, it'd be great just to get a very kind of high level overview of Oodle for the benefit of people who've never heard of Oodle before, and also what led you to working for them.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Oodle Car Finance. So primarily a business that's 6 years old now, and is very much we're looking at making that car buying journey easier. And the analogy I use is you don't typically, and you were saying earlier, you've just bought, you're in the process of buying a new house. People get a mortgage and then go and look for a new house. And what the research and insight that we've got is that basically a lot of people go and try and find a car, and then the finance is kind of bolted on at the back end, and it's not necessarily always a great experience. And car buying in general, a lot of the insight says that it's not whether it's physical, going to a forecast, whether it's digital, whether it's a combination of those two. Research and insight shows it's not great. So what we're looking to do is really have that Amazon one-click kind of experience, so that you can basically say, right, let's sort my finance out, and almost have it's a digital wallet product, so that you can have that finance. You can go onto our marketplace where we have about 20,000 cars, or you can go off and find your own car from another dealer, or find it in another marketplace somewhere else, and that will support on that journey from you actually buying the car all the way through owning the car, and also any after sales and services. So if there's a problem with your car, then we can step in and help there. So it's really just to help make that a much easier and simple process, which is quite complicated. And that's it's been successful. That's shown in the Trustpilot scores at 4.8. So we have a 5-star rating, certainly leading the way there. Over 600 employees split primarily across 3 or 4 sites: Manchester, Oxford, and London. And that's Oodle. And what led me here was that Tom, one of the directors, I'd worked with him in a few businesses before. He approached me and asked for some support and to lead on some initiatives in the direct-to-consumer marketing space. So that's kind of what led me. It's probably about 9-10 months ago now. That's the flavour.
No, that's really helpful. And obviously we've worked with each other, Darin, for several months now. And I've noticed you do quite a few different things at Oodle. So how would you describe your role, the organizational structure, and how procurement and supplier relationship management fits into some of the big projects that you've worked on since you've been there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, like you say, is a number of initiatives and projects that I've been working across the business, which is great, really interesting. And then, so after about 3 or 4 months, late last year, I was asked by the CFO at the time to look at, a diagnostic and an operating model, typical target operating model design for what would procurement and third-party relationship management look like. And obviously it's ground zero, greenfield, whatever the phrase is these days. So one of those activities was to, no surprise, because as you're aware, we went out and appointed a head of procurement that starts shortly. So really it's about now laying those foundations and that governance in place, as helping support the business on some new strategic initiatives as you said, we're going through lots of growth. So that's obviously requires lots of suppliers and partners to lean on, but also to make sure that we've got that core governance and foundation in place to make sure that as we start to, as the teams gets built out, that those things are in place. So that's kind of been my focus really for the last few months here.
Great. And since you've been there, Darin, how would you describe the culture at Oodle? Obviously, I came up to Oxford to meet with you and some of the other people there, and I think it's fair to say it's a different business.
Yeah, that's very true. It's definitely not corporate. It feels like as I've obviously been to a lot of marketing agencies around the place, and it definitely got more of a marketing agency feel than what I would call a typical financial services or fintech business that I've worked and been privy to. So, it's not really a hierarchical organisation. So we don't, obviously there's teams of people for each of the areas, like loan origination, loan processing, loan management, so on and so forth. But for me, it's a very open culture, and I think you've seen it in obviously the values that, with it being a founder-led business, 6 years old, very entrepreneurial feel. Gone through lot of growth, as you said, not just in revenue, but in people and teams and in infrastructure that's been put in the business last sort of 12 to 18 months. So certainly been a really positive view. And looking at it from with a procurement supplier hat on, one of the typical issues that you face into is that not all of the stakeholders align. Not all the stakeholders want you there or want the people that we're bringing in to the business necessarily. They want to own those relationships. There's none of that at Oodle, which is really refreshing. So it means that a lot of the time and effort that may be soaked into winning stakeholders is actually kind of already done, because it is a very open environment. So, and that comes down in sort of the way the teams work and the way the teams operate together.
It's nice. Sounds very refreshing. And can you tell us a bit about the new mandate that Procurement Heads has just taken on with you?
Sure. Yeah. So it's another. Well, everything's going to be greenfield as the team. So it's a greenfield supplier relationship management role that we're looking to bring on board. In addition to the head of procurement that we've appointed, it's working primarily in our customer and loan management team. It's working for a guy called Matt Manders, who's head of operational strategy and oversight. We're working closely with head of procurement, working closely with a number of other of the senior managers. And really that, it's a role that is post-contract, and it's that ongoing relationship where typically a lot of value is lost in many businesses, where procurement would step away, typically post, in some organisations, I should add, not all, in some organisations where they step away and there's value to be lost. So it's really driving some governance, some innovation, and the role's almost making sure that, our customers forefront of mind, how that translates into the business requirements, and making sure that translates to our suppliers and partners. In many of the instances in this area, they are an extension of the team. They're not traditional supplier relationships. There are some of those. Just to bring it to life, I'll sort of like spell out some of the categories. It is actually an eclectic mix of suppliers and partners, right from credit bureaus, vehicle delivery, speech analytics, external specialist lawyers, vehicle provenance checking, repossession and recovery agents, auction houses, national repair and lease companies. And as I said, I probably missed a few out there as well, but it's really, there's nothing that's off limits. So within that area of customer management, it's really providing support to the guys in the teams to make sure that we've got some governance, some risk management, but also some real support in that area. And just to bring it to life a bit more, it's not necessarily somebody who's like a pure, whilst, yes, as you said, like fintech, but a lot of those suppliers that I've mentioned, whilst they've obviously got technology that powers them, they're a lot more facing directly in what I would call the automotive space. A lot of those suppliers and partners, we're dealing with like the founders of the business, the directors of the business. It's very senior relationships because they're much typically smaller businesses. They're not massive multinationals where you might find on the technology side of the business where you're dealing with account managers, account directors that part of very, very large businesses. And that's what we're, it's also looking for somebody who's an advocate for those partners to make sure they're getting what they need from us at Oodle. So it's a two-way street. And really sort of like identifying some opportunities. And, one of the opportunities we're working on at the moment is the operating model around, vehicle logistics, both the delivery and any repossessions and recoveries and terminations, etc. And having conversations around electric vehicles for the trucks, for the pickups. So, what can we do not only that's better for the environment, but also there's efficiencies, it's better for the customer, there's cost savings, etc., etc. So I'd expect this person and the role to really work with both the stakeholder community and the procurement team to really drive some value there.
Fantastic. Sounds like a brilliant role for the right person. Certainly one that is interesting and will continue to get interesting the more you uncover, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in this role based on the way you've described it, Darin. And for someone watching, what personality, background, and skill set do you think this person will need to have in order to really thrive in this role?
Yeah, I think obviously great interpersonal skills, stakeholder management skills. I think that's a prerequisite for most jobs these days.
Yeah.
So it's probably nothing new there. Dealing with internal teams and third parties. They may have had also experience not just managing suppliers, but in a partnership or sales role. So, it's externally facing and working between different business entities. The ability to deal with ambiguity, as I said, it's a greenfield role. So to make comfortable making imperfect decisions with incomplete qual and quant data, obviously over time they'll be able to improve that. Someone who's a self-starter, this isn't a micromanaged role. That certainly there's no micromanaged roles that I've seen at Oodle, but a continuous improvement mindset. So making sure that there is that someone who can see that big picture, is probably more commercially minded, understands the impact of decisions made with a supplier and a partner and how that ladders up into our customers. Able to manage the risk and regulatory requirements, not necessarily somebody who's like an expert in regulatory requirements. We have a really, really good internal team, legal compliance and oversight teams that can support this person in making sure that that's been driven in the governance and the cadence of the meetings that we need. And then, as I touched on before, probably somebody who's maybe had more experience working with automotive as opposed to in the tech sector, but again, industry agnostic. So, if someone's worked in a different industry but has some of those skill sets and wants to learn in this job, this is a great opportunity for someone.
Brilliant. And I think for the benefit of people watching as well, a lot of people see supplier relationship manager roles or supplier management roles, and because they've never had that job title before, I think they're often a bit afraid to apply. But I think, as we discussed before, Darin, there's lots of SRM in senior buyer or category manager roles, for example. And do you think people from that background might be a good fit also?
Absolutely. In most procurement roles, even post, as I say, post contract signature or whatever you want to call it, but post deal done or whatever, is that there's always those people who will have to then manage that ongoing relationship, either because the stakeholder doesn't do it, either because it's part of that role, it's something they enjoy. So I think for somebody who prefers that post RFX event and likes, building those relationships and driving value through the long term, rather than just in lots and lots of negotiations or lots of other types of activity, this role's definitely up there. And it's not to say this person can't also get involved if there were to be tenders or there to be reviews and work closely on that. But that's not the primary reason for bringing somebody on board.
And what's the working policy for this role? Do you require them to be in one of the offices 5 days a week, or with clients? How do you see that kind of moving forwards?
Yeah, I mean, this role, soon enough, this person will manage their own diary, so they won't. Like I said before, they're not. It's up for them to determine what travel's required. As I said, we've got. This person could primarily be based broadly anywhere, or UK based. I'll hasten to add. But with offices in Manchester, London, and Oxford, there will be some travel required into offices for meetings and key meetings. A lot of it's done by Zoom and Teams, like we are now. And also, I'd expect this person to go and actually meet a number of our suppliers and partners that are spread around the country, to really understand their processes and that's done. So I'd imagine certainly in the first 3 to 6 months, probably more travel, and then for that to settle down. But there's certainly no hard and fast policy that it's X number of days or anything like that. This really is whatever's required for the role.
And are there any qualifications you think this person might need for the role?
In short, no.
Okay.
So yeah, no, it doesn't have to be degree qualified or SIPS or anything like that. That's not to exclude people who've got degrees and SIPS qualified or other relevant qualifications. But I think for me, it's somebody who wants to work in this type of environment, put their stamp on something, and work in this kind of work closely with the team, internal team and the third parties. So no is the short answer.
Right. Finally, Darin, why would someone want to join Oodle? What makes Oodle different from its competitors? And there's a couple that probably spring to mind for quite a few people.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I think first of all, if I haven't explained why someone want to join Oodle by now, I'm not sure. Just to sort of recap, maybe. I think it's for somebody who likes to be able to put their own stamp on it, who wants the ability to drive change, work in an environment that's a pull environment where people are pulling on your time and resource, as opposed to somebody who, like I said, who wants to work in that ambiguous environment. And this is right in their slipstream. It's technically disrupting the marketplace, trying to be very entrepreneurial environment. So for somebody of that with that ilk and that kind of view, that's a real idea. And I think ultimately, I kind of reflect on that question and say, well, why have I stuck around a lot longer here than a lot of the gigs that I tend to do? And there's challenge, there's variety, but actually it's really enjoying working with the people that I work with. And I genuinely say that, that's, you spend a lot of time at work, and, the people that I work with across the business, and even with our partners as well, it's a very enjoyable working environment. It's very collaborative. So certainly that would be a big draw for that. What makes Oodle different from competition? Everyone, I think I touched on it before, is that what we're trying to do is go with a finance first, the digital wallet product. There's obviously other flavors of that coming out there, and I'm sure other competition are out there, but it's just about making, that car buying journey easier. Lots of other players in the market, as you allude to there, but it's sometimes you get too hung up on comparing yourself against others. I think with the growth that the business has had, we know that there's a market for this. We know that there's a lot of consumers and customers out there who really do need that support in that car buying journey. I've bought a number of cars over the years, and technically being an engineer and working in procurement and spending 15 years in automotive, you'd think I was probably qualified. But even I go to buy a car, and even I'm going, oh god, cool, this is a bit of a hassle. So let's be under no illusions that that simplification is critical. And we're definitely on that journey. We're certainly not of the opinion that we're there, but we've got all the right building blocks in place, and certainly the right team in place as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Darin. Thanks so much for your time today. It was really good to understand more about Oodle and the unique proposition in this role. For anybody looking to apply, you can do so by connecting with me on LinkedIn, dropping me a message with your up-to-date CV, or equally you can read the full advert and apply via the link on our website.